After losing her mother and discovering her fiancé's betrayal, Clara Martinez retreats to her great-aunt's farmhouse to heal. What begins as an escape becomes an unexpected journey of renewal when a storm brings her face to face with Miguel, a neighboring farmer carrying his own painful past. Their connection, sparked by rescuing a stranded calf, might just be the second chance at happiness they both need. Before we begin this story, comment below where you're watching from. The rain pounded against the windows of the small farmhouse as Clara Martinez unpacked the last of her suitcases. At 26, she never imagined she would end up here, in the middle of nowhere, hiding from the life she had carefully built in the city. But after everything that had happened, this old house belonging to her great-aunt seemed like the only safe place left in the world. Just a few months, Clara whispered to herself, running her hand over the worn wooden dresser. Just enough. Time to heal. The tiny bedroom looked frozen in time, with faded floral wallpaper and a squeaky bed that had probably been there since her great-aunt was young. Clara placed the framed photo of her mother on the nightstand, the last picture. Taken before the cancer took her just 3 months ago. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was Jessica, her former supervisor at Metropolitan Hospital. "How's country life treating you?" Jessica asked, her voice carrying the familiar sounds of the busy hospital in the background. "I just got here," Clara replied, watching the rain intensify outside. "The house is exactly as I remembered from when I visited as a kid. We miss you at the ER. That new nurse they hired doesn't have half your skill with the difficult patients." Clara forced a smile, even though no one could see it. "I just needed some time after everything with Mom and then Daniel." "I understand. That jerk didn't deserve you anyway. Finding out he was cheating on you right after your mother's funeral, he should be ashamed to call himself a doctor." The mention of her ex-fiancé made Clara's chest tighten. 6 years together, planning their wedding, and all it took was one text message accidentally sent to her instead of his other girlfriend to shatter the illusion. "I don't want to talk about Daniel," Clara said firmly. "How long before they fill my position permanently? Your leave is approved for 3 months after that. Well, you know how hospital administration is." After ending the call, Clara walked to the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea. The house creaked and moaned with every gust of wind. Outside, the rain had transformed the dirt path into mud, and the fields surrounding the property looked like small lakes. A sudden high-pitched cry cut through the sound of rain. Clara froze, cup halfway to her lips. There it was again, a weak, desperate sound coming from somewhere outside. She rushed to the window and peered out into the storm. At first she saw nothing but sheets of rain. Then a movement caught her eye, something small and dark struggling in a puddle near the fence line that separated her great-aunt's property from the neighboring farm. Without thinking, Clara grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, not bothering with an umbrella or even shoes. The cold mud squished between her toes as she splashed across the yard, guided only by the faint cries and the beam of her flashlight. "I'm coming," she called out, though she wasn't sure what she was running toward. The rain soaked through her, clothes in seconds, plastering her dark hair to her face and neck. As she got closer to the fence, she finally saw it. A small black and white calf, no more than a few days old, stuck in a deep puddle of mud. Its skinny legs kicked helplessly as it tried to free itself, its cries growing weaker. Clara didn't hesitate. She climbed through the fence and waded into the mud, which reached halfway up her calves. The calf was exhausted, its big brown eyes looking up at her with what she could swear was relief. "It's okay, little one," she soothed, placing her hands under its belly. "I've got you." The calf was heavier than she expected, and the suction of the mud made it difficult to pull. Clara dug her feet in and pulled with all her strength, ignoring the cold and the rain pelting her face. Inch by inch, the calf began to move. "Come on," she urged, her muscles burning with effort. "Just a little more." With one final heave, the calf came free from the mud with a wet, sucking sound. Clara lost her balance and fell backward, the calf tumbling on top of her. She quickly righted herself and checked the animal for injuries. It was shivering violently, its coat matted with mud. Without hesitation, Clara pulled off her wool sweater, leaving herself in just a thin t-shirt, and wrapped it around the trembling calf. She was so focused on rubbing warmth back into the animal that she didn't notice the tall figure approaching until a deep voice spoke. Never seen such beauty in such a simple act. Clara's head snapped up. Standing a few feet away was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a rain slicker and boots. His face was partially hidden under the brim of a worn cowboy hat, but she could make out a strong jaw covered in dark stubble and eyes that seemed to pierce right through her. He was stuck, Clara explained, suddenly aware of how she must look, soaked to the bone, covered in mud, and half-dressed in the pouring rain. The man nodded and stepped closer. That's Estrella's calf. She must have wandered off during the storm. His voice was deep but gentle. I've been looking for him since this morning. Clara continued to rub the calf's back through her sweater. He's freezing. Without another word, the man shrugged off his rain slicker and draped it over Clara's shoulders. The warmth of it, still carrying his body heat, made her realize how cold she really was. My place is closer, he said, bending down to scoop up the calf in his strong arms. Can you walk? Clara nodded, pulling the slicker tighter around herself. I'm Clara Martinez. I'm staying at Elisa Duarte's property. Your great-aunt, he said, surprising her. I know. I'm Miguel Herrera. My family's farm borders yours on this side. They walked in silence through the rain, the man, Miguel, carrying the calf as if it weighed nothing. Clara couldn't help but notice the grim set of his mouth, the way his eyes seemed focused on something far away, even as he navigated the muddy path with sure steps. Miguel's farmhouse was larger than her great-aunt's, but just as weathered by time and elements. Inside it was surprisingly warm, with a fire crackling in a stone fireplace that dominated the living room. The bathroom is down the hall, Miguel said, as he placed the calf on a blanket near the fire. There should be towels in there. I'll find you something dry to wear. Clara hesitated, suddenly self-conscious about being in a stranger's home. Thank you, but I should get back. The storm's getting worse, Miguel interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. And you're shivering so hard your teeth are chattering. He was right, of course. Clara nodded and headed toward the bathroom, leaving muddy footprints on the wooden floor. In the small, clean bathroom, she peeled off her wet clothes and wrapped herself in a towel. Her reflection in the mirror showed pale skin and dark circles under her eyes, remnants of months of sleepless nights at her mother's bedside. A soft knock at the door made her jump. I left some clothes outside the door. Miguel's voice came through. They belong to my... He stopped abruptly. They'll be too big, but they're dry. Clara waited until his footsteps retreated before opening the door just enough to grab the neatly folded clothes, a flannel shirt and sweatpants with a drawstring waist. As Miguel had predicted, they swam on her slender frame, but they were warm and soft from years of washing. When she returned to the living room, Miguel was kneeling beside the calf, carefully cleaning mud from its coat with a damp cloth. Clara noticed for the first time how gentle his large, calloused hands were as they moved over the small animal. Is he going to be okay? She asked, kneeling down beside them. Miguel nodded without looking at her. He's lucky you found him when you did. Another hour in this cold and... He didn't finish the sentence. Clara reached out to stroke the calf's head. What will happen to him now? I'll bottle feed him until he's strong enough to rejoin the herd. His mother rejected him at birth. Happens sometimes. There was something in the way he said it that made Clara look up at him. His profile was strong. Straight nose, thick eyebrows, and surprisingly long eyelashes that cast shadows on his cheekbones in the firelight. But it was the sadness in his eyes that caught her attention, a deep, quiet pain that looked all too familiar. You said his name. Is Estrella's calf? Does he have his own name? Clara asked, trying to break the heavy silence. Miguel shook his head. Don't name the livestock, it's not wise to get attached. Well, I think he deserves a name after surviving that. Clara studied the small black and white face. How about Lucky? A hint of a smile tugged at the corner of Miguel's mouth. Not very original. Sometimes the simplest names are the best, Clara defended, surprised to find herself smiling back. The moment stretched between them until Miguel abruptly stood up. I'll make coffee, you're still cold. While he moved around the kitchen, Clara took in the living room. It was sparsely furnished but clean, with none of the feminine touches you might expect in a family home. The only photographs on display showed an older couple, Miguel's parents, she guessed, and a group photo of what looked like a large Hispanic family gathered for a celebration. "You live here alone?" she asked when Miguel returned with 2 steaming mugs. He handed her one without meeting her eyes. "Yes, for 2 years now." Something in his tone discouraged further questions. They sat in silence, drinking coffee and watching the fire while the calf dozed, wrapped in blankets between them. "The rain's letting up," Miguel finally said, glancing toward the window. "I can drive you back to your aunt's place." Clara nodded, feeling oddly reluctant to leave the warmth of the fire and the quiet company. "Oh, what about my clothes? I'll have them washed and return them tomorrow." Miguel stood and reached for a set of keys hanging by the door. "We should get this little guy settled in the barn first." Outside, the rain had indeed slowed to a gentle drizzle. Miguel carefully carried the calf, now wrapped in a clean blanket, to a small barn behind the house. Inside, several horses nickered softly in their stalls, and the sweet smell of hay filled the air. Miguel placed the calf in a clean stall with fresh straw. "He'll be warm enough here tonight." Clara watched as he expertly prepared a bottle of milk replacer and fed it to the eager calf. There was something mesmerizing about seeing such a large, rough-looking man being so tender with the small animal. "Oh, you're good at that," she observed. Miguel shrugged. "Been doing it all my life." The drive to her great-aunt's house took less than 5 minutes in Miguel's mud-splattered pickup truck. He insisted on walking her to the door, his boots crunching, on the gravel driveway. At the porch, Clara turned to thank him, suddenly aware that she was still wearing his dead wife's clothes. She didn't know how she knew they had belonged to his wife. He hadn't said as much, but she was certain of it. "Thank you for your help," she said, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill night air. Miguel nodded, his face half hidden in shadows. "You did the hard part." He hesitated, then added, "That calf wouldn't have made it without you." Before Clara could respond, he turned and walked back to his truck. She watched until the taillights disappeared around the bend in the road, feeling oddly like she had just experienced something significant, though she couldn't quite say what. Inside, Clara made herself another cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the clouds break apart to reveal a star-studded sky. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt something other than grief and betrayal, a small spark of curiosity about the quiet farmer next door and the pain he carried in his eyes. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Clara dreamed, not of hospital corridors or her mother's sickbed or Daniel's betrayal, but of rain-soaked fields and gentle hands tending to a vulnerable creature. And somewhere in the distance, a man's voice echoed, "Never seen such beauty in such a simple act." The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if the previous day's storm had never happened. Clara woke early, her body still on hospital schedule despite her best efforts to sleep in. She made herself a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, then decided to walk the property in the daylight. Outside, puddles dotted the yard, reflecting the blue sky overhead. Clara breathed deeply, savoring the clean, earthy smell that followed a heavy rain. It was so different from the antiseptic scent of hospital corridors that had filled her days for years. As she walked toward the fence line where she had found the calf, her thoughts drifted to Miguel Herrera. There was something about him that intrigued her, a depth of feeling beneath his quiet exterior that reminded her of the still waters of a lake, hiding currents beneath the surface. When she reached the spot where the calf had been stuck, Clara saw that the mud had already begun to dry in the morning sun. On the other side of the fence, a movement caught her eye. Miguel was walking through his field, heading in her direction with something in his hands. Her clothes from yesterday, she realized. They reached the fence at the same time. Up close in the daylight, Miguel looked even more imposing than he had in the rain, tall and broad-shouldered, with black hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar. His face was sun-darkened and serious, with lines around his eyes that suggested he was a man who had once smiled often, but had forgotten how. "Good morning," Clara said, suddenly aware that she was wearing an old t-shirt and pajama shorts, her hair hastily pulled into a messy ponytail. Miguel nodded in greeting. "I brought your clothes. My housekeeper washed and dried them." He handed over the neatly folded clothes through the fence rails. His fingers brushed against hers for just a moment, and Clara felt an unexpected jolt at the brief contact. "Thank you," she said. "How's the calf this morning?" Something shifted in Miguel's expression, a softening around the eyes. "He's doing well, already on his feet and demanding his bottle." "Lucky is a fighter," Clara said with a smile. Miguel's mouth twitched, almost forming a smile of his own. "You're really sticking with that name, aren't you?" "Absolutely. It suits him." A silence fell between them, not exactly uncomfortable, but charged with something Clara couldn't quite name. "I should thank you properly," Miguel finally said, "for saving him. Would you like to come over and see him? I was about to give him his morning feeding." Clara hesitated only briefly. "I'd like that. Let me just change first." 10 minutes later, she was walking up the dirt path to Miguel's farm, wearing jeans and a light sweater. The farm looked different in the daylight, larger and more well-kept than she had realized. Besides the main house and barn, there were several other outbuildings, and a large vegetable garden stretched along one side of the property. Miguel met her at the barn door. "Faye's in here," he said, leading the way inside. The calf was indeed up on his feet, standing somewhat wobbly in his stall. When he saw them enter, he let out a hopeful bawl and trotted forward, bumping against Clara's legs as if he recognized her. "He remembers you," Miguel said, sounding surprised. Clara knelt down, running her hand over the calf's soft head. "Hi there, Lucky. You're looking much better today." Miguel handed her a bottle of milk. "Would you like to feed him?" Clara took the bottle and offered it to the eager calf, who began to suckle vigorously. She laughed at his enthusiasm. He was hungry. "He's got a good appetite." That's always a good sign. As they watched the calf feed, Clara found herself studying Miguel from the corner of her eye. In the soft light filtering through the barn windows, she could see the fine lines on his face more clearly, signs of grief or worry, etched deeply for someone who couldn't be much older than 30. "Have you lived here long?" she asked. Miguel leaned against the stall door. "All my life. This farm has been in my family for 3 generations. You must love it very much." He looked around the barn, his gaze distant. "It's all I know." There was something in his voice, not quite regret, but a hint of resignation, that made Clara wonder if he had ever wanted something different. "And you?" Miguel asked, turning his dark eyes on her. "Your aunt said you're a nurse in the city." Clara was surprised. "You've spoken to my great-aunt." "Small community," Miguel explained with a shrug. "Everyone knows everyone. Elisa mentioned you might be coming to stay for a while." Clara focused on the calf, avoiding Miguel's gaze. "I needed a break from the hospital. After my mom died, I just couldn't face it anymore." Miguel didn't offer empty condolences or platitudes for which Clara was grateful. Instead, he simply nodded, as if he understood completely. "When does the break end?" he asked. "I have 3 months of leave. After that, I'm not sure." The calf finished his bottle and began to nose around Clara's hands for more. She laughed softly, scratching his ears. "You're a natural with him," Miguel observed. Clara smiled. "I've always loved animals. We couldn't have pets in our apartment growing up, but I volunteered at an animal shelter through high school." A thought struck her. "I could help with him while I'm here. It would give me something to do besides stare at the walls and think too much." Miguel seemed to consider this. "He needs feeding every 4 hours, including through the night." "I don't sleep much these days anyway," Clara admitted, "and your place is just a short walk from mine." Miguel hesitated, then nodded. "All right, if you're sure." And just like that, a routine was established. Clara would come to Miguel's farm 4 times a day to help with Lucky's feedings. Sometimes Miguel would be there, sometimes not. He had a farm to run, after all. But more often than not, he would find a reason to be in the barn when she arrived. Their conversations were brief at first, limited to discussions about the calf's progress. But gradually, as the days passed, they began to talk about other things: the weather, the local town, the history of their neighboring farms. Clara learned that Miguel ran the farm mostly on his own, with occasional help from local teenagers during busy seasons. His parents had retired to Arizona 5 years ago, leaving him in charge of the family business. What he didn't mention, ever, was his wife. The woman whose clothes Clara had worn that first night remained a ghost between them, unacknowledged but ever present. One evening, about 2 weeks after the storm, Clara arrived for Lucky's evening, feeding to find Miguel sitting on a hay bale staring into space. He seemed startled by her arrival, as if he had been lost in thought. "Everything okay?" she asked, preparing the bottle for Lucky, who was now strong enough to run circles around his stall when he saw her coming. Miguel rubbed a hand over his face. "Just tired, long day." Clara nodded, not pushing. She had learned that Miguel shared things in his own time, if at all. As she fed Lucky, she told Miguel about her day, how she had finally unpacked the last of her boxes, how she had spoken with Jessica at the hospital, how she had discovered a family of rabbits living under the porch of her great-aunt's house. "You seem more settled," Miguel observed when she finished. Clara considered this. "I suppose I am. It's peaceful here. Not like the city." "No," she agreed. "Not like the city at all." Miguel stood and walked to the barn door, looking out at the setting sun. "There's a farmer's market in town tomorrow. First one of the season. They usually have good food, local crafts, and that sort of thing." Clara waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. Miguel kept his back to her. "I'm taking some of our early produce to sell. If you wanted to see more of the town, you could come along." The invitation hung in the air between them. Clara felt her heart beat a little faster, though she told herself it was ridiculous to feel this way about such a simple offer. "I'd like that," she said quietly. Miguel nodded once, still not turning around. "I'll pick you up at 7. The next morning, Clara woke before her alarm, butterflies fluttering in her stomach. She told herself it wasn't a date, just a friendly outing with her neighbor. Still, she found herself changing outfits 3 times before settling on a simple sundress with a light cardigan. Miguel arrived precisely at 7, driving the same mud-splattered pickup truck. He had made an effort too, she noticed, his usual work clothes replaced by clean jeans and a button-down shirt, his dark hair still damp from a shower. The drive to town was quiet but not uncomfortably so. Clara watched the rolling farmland give way to the small town center, where booths and tables were already being set up in the town square. "It's charming," she said, as Miguel parked the truck. "It's small," he replied, but there was fondness in his voice. Miguel's booth was simple, a wooden table with the name Herrera Farms painted on a banner above it. He arranged baskets of early spring vegetables, spinach, lettuce, radishes, spring onions, while Clara helped, following his instructions. Once everything was set up, Miguel introduced her to the neighboring vendors, an older couple selling homemade preserves, a young woman with handcrafted soaps, a family offering fresh eggs and honey. Everyone greeted Miguel with respect, but Clara couldn't help noticing the curious glances they cast between her and Miguel, or the way conversations would pause momentarily when they approached. "Is it my imagination, or are people staring at us?" she asked quietly, as they walked away from a booth selling fresh flowers. Miguel's jaw tightened. "Small town. They're not used to seeing me with anyone." There it was again, the unspoken reference to his past, to the wife who was never mentioned. "Miguel, good to see you out and about, son." A cheerful voice broke into Clara's thoughts. An older man with a white beard was approaching them, his smile wide beneath kind eyes. "Pastor Jim," Miguel greeted him with a nod. "This is Clara Martinez. She's staying at Elisa Duarte's place." The pastor turned his smile on Clara. "Welcome to our little community, my dear. We've heard so much about you." Clara blinked in surprise. "You have?" Pastor Jim chuckled. "Word travels, especially when it involves someone braving a thunderstorm to rescue a calf. That's the kind of story people around here love to tell." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "It wasn't that dramatic." "I was there." "It was," Miguel said quietly, surprising her. Pastor Jim looked between them, his expression thoughtful. "Well, I won't keep you two, but Clara, you're welcome at our church anytime. Sunday services are at 10, though the doors are always open if you just need a quiet place to think." After the pastor moved on, Miguel seemed different, more tense. His answers shorter when customers approached their booth. Clara helped him sell his produce, finding that she enjoyed the interactions with the townsfolk, who were friendly and curious about the city nurse staying at the old Duarte place. By mid-morning, their booth was nearly sold out. Miguel was counting their earnings when a tall, elegantly dressed woman approached. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and makeup that seemed too polished for a small-town farmer's market. "Miguel," she said, her voice carrying a note of surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." Miguel's expression closed off completely. Rebecca. Clara felt the temperature between them drop by several degrees. The woman, Rebecca, turned her attention to Clara, her gaze assessing. "And who might this be?" "Clara Martinez," Clara said, extending her hand. "I'm staying at the farm next to Miguel's." Rebecca's perfectly manicured hand barely touched Clara's before withdrawing. "How nice. I'm Rebecca Phillips. My family owns the bank in town." Her gaze shifted back to Miguel. "And I'm also on the town council now. We've been discussing the zoning for that expansion you inquired about." Miguel's shoulders tensed visibly. "And?" Rebecca smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "These things take time, as you know, but perhaps we could discuss it over dinner. I still have your proposal on my desk." Clara felt suddenly awkward, like she was witnessing a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. She took a step back. "I think I'll go get us some coffee," she murmured. Neither Miguel nor Rebecca acknowledged her departure. Clara made her way to a coffee stand on the other side of the square, her mind spinning with questions. Who was Rebecca? To Miguel? And what expansion was she talking about? As she waited in line, she overheard a conversation between two middle-aged women ahead of her. "Saw her talking to Miguel Herrera just now," one was saying. "That woman has no shame." "Well, she always thought she could have him, even when Maria was alive," the other replied. "Guess she figures 2 years is long enough to wait." Clara felt her heart stutter at the mention of a name. Maria. Miguel's wife, she was certain. "Poor Miguel," the first woman sighed. "Never been the same since the accident. Can't blame him, the way it happened." "Terrible business," her friend agreed. "Him having to choose like that." Clara was so focused on their conversation that she almost missed her turn at the counter. She ordered 2 coffees absently, her thoughts racing. What had happened to Miguel's wife? What choice had he had to make? When she returned to the booth, Rebecca was gone, but Miguel was still tense, his jaw set in a rigid line. "Here," Clara said, offering him one of the coffees. "I thought you might need this." Miguel looked at her for a long moment before accepting. "The cup." "Thanks." They packed up the remaining produce in silence. It wasn't until they were driving back toward the farms that Miguel finally spoke. "Rebecca is complicated." Clara waited, sipping her coffee, not wanting to push. "Her family has a lot of influence in town," Miguel continued, his eyes fixed on the road. "I need their support for a project I'm working on." "The expansion," she mentioned. He nodded. "I want to convert part of the farm to organic practices, try some new crops. It requires rezoning some of the land." Clara studied his profile. "And Rebecca's support comes with strings attached." Miguel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Something like that. She knew your wife," Clara said softly, taking a risk. Miguel's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with surprise before quickly returning to the road. For a moment, Clara thought he wouldn't answer. "Yes," he finally said, his voice rough. She knew Maria. The name hung in the air between them, the first time it had been spoken aloud in Clara's presence. "I'm sorry," Clara said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for, bringing up his wife, or for the fact that he had lost her. Miguel pulled the truck onto the dirt road leading to their farms. "You heard something in town?" It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "Just that there was an accident, that's all." Miguel stopped the truck halfway between their houses. He sat there for a long moment, staring straight ahead, his profile carved in stone. "There are things about me you don't know, Clara," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Things that would make you see me differently." Clara reached out hesitantly and placed her hand on his arm. We all have parts of our past we're not proud of. Miguel looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Something passed between them, a current of understanding, of shared pain. Thank you for today, Clara said, gently withdrawing her hand. I enjoyed seeing the town. Miguel nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Lucky will be waiting for his lunchtime feeding. It was a return to safer ground, and Clara accepted it with a smile. I'll be there. As she walked back to her great-aunt's house, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted between them. Miguel had walls built so high and thick that few people could scale them. But today, she had glimpsed just a tiny opening, a crack in the fortress he had built around his heart. And despite all the warnings her head was shouting that she wasn't ready, that he was clearly still haunted by his past, that she was only here temporarily, Clara found herself drawn to that small opening, wondering what lay on the other side. That night, as she fed Lucky his final bottle of the day, she watched Miguel moving around the barn, closing things up for the night. In the soft glow of the barn lights with his guard down, he looked younger, less burdened by whatever ghosts haunted him. Miguel, she said, as she put the empty bottle aside, whatever happened in the past, it doesn't change who you are now. He froze, his back to her. For a long moment he didn't move or speak, then, so quietly she almost missed it, he replied, "That's where you're wrong. It changed everything." Before she could respond, he walked out of the barn, leaving her alone with Lucky and the weight of words unspoken between them. The weeks following the farmer's market settled into a comfortable rhythm for Clara. Her days revolved around caring for Lucky, exploring the farmland and occasional trips into town for supplies. The little calf was growing stronger every day, his wobbling legs now steady beneath him as he followed Clara around the barn like a puppy whenever she visited. What hadn't settled was the strange tension between her and Miguel. Since that day at the farmer's market, he had been both more open and more guarded, a paradox that Clara couldn't quite understand. He would share stories about the farm's history or explain the intricacies of crop rotation, but the moment their conversations veered toward anything personal, he would retreat behind an invisible wall. One sunny afternoon in late April, Clara arrived at the barn to find Miguel bent over Lucky, examining the calf's coat with a concerned expression. "Is something wrong?" she asked, setting down the book she had brought to read while Lucky napped after his feeding. Miguel straightened up. "Just checking him for ticks. It's that time of year." Clara knelt beside him and ran her hand over Lucky's black and white hide. The calf nuzzled her palm, seeking treats. "He seems fine to me." "You've gotten attached to him," Miguel observed. Clara smiled. "Is that so terrible?" "No," Miguel said softly. "It's not terrible at all." Something in his voice made Clara look. Miguel was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen before, a softness around his eyes, a slight curve to his mouth that wasn't quite a smile, but was close. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. Miguel shook his head slightly. "Nothing, just... you remind me of someone." The unspoken name hung between them. "Maria." Clara stood, brushing straw from her jeans. "I should get him his bottle." As she prepared Lucky's formula, Clara found herself wondering again about Miguel's wife. What had she been like? Had she loved the farm as much as Miguel did? What kind of accident had taken her life? And what was the choice those women at the market had mentioned? When she returned with the bottle, Miguel was sitting on a hay bale looking at his phone with a frown. "Bad news?" Clara asked, kneeling to feed Lucky. Miguel slipped the phone back into his pocket. "The bank. They're still stalling on my loan. Application for the organic expansion. Rebecca's family bank." He nodded grimly. "The only bank in town." Clara focused on Lucky, who was eagerly suckling at the bottle. "Have you considered looking at other banks in the next county?" "Tried that. No one wants to take a risk on a small farm these days, especially one trying something new." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Clara had come to recognize as a sign of frustration. "Rebecca made it clear that her support on the town council for my rezoning application is tied to the bank's decision." "That sounds like a conflict of interest," Clara commented. Miguel's laugh was short and bitter. Welcome to small-town politics. What does she want from you? Clara asked, though she suspected she already knew. Miguel stood and paced the length of the stall. Dinner, drinks, her choice of restaurant in the city. His jaw tightened. She's been after me since high school, even when Maria and I were together. It was the most he had ever said about his relationship with his wife, and Clara treaded carefully. And you're not interested? No. He turned to face her, his eyes intense. I'm not. The air between them seemed to thicken. Clara became acutely aware of her heartbeat, of the way Miguel's gaze seemed to see right through her carefully constructed defenses. Lucky finished his bottle and butted his head against Clara's leg, breaking. The moment. She laughed shakily and scratched the calf's ears. He's getting so big, she said, desperate to return to safer ground. Miguel accepted the change of subject. He's almost ready to join the others in the pasture. Another week or two, perhaps. Clara felt an unexpected pang at the thought. Oh, I didn't realize it would be so soon. That was always the plan, Miguel reminded her gently. Get him strong enough to join the herd. I know. Clara stood and brushed the straw from her clothes. I've gotten used to our routine. I guess. Miguel took a step toward her. Clara. The chirp of her phone interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Clara pulled it from her pocket and felt her stomach drop when she saw the name on the screen. Daniel. I should take this, she said, avoiding Miguel's eyes. I'll be back for the evening feeding. Clara hurried out of the barn, her hands shaking as she answered the call. What do you want, Daniel? Clara, finally. Her ex-fiancé's voice was as smooth and confident as ever. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I changed my number for a reason. Clara walked quickly toward her great-aunt's house, putting distance between herself and the barn. Look, I know you're upset. Upset? Clara laughed incredulously. You were cheating on me while my mother was dying. Upset doesn't begin to cover it. Daniel sighed, a sound Clara once found endearing, but now recognized as calculated. I made a mistake, a huge one. But Clara, we were together for 6 years. Don't throw that away without giving me a chance to explain. There's nothing to explain. Clara reached her porch and sank onto the steps, suddenly exhausted. How did you even get this number? Jessica gave it to me. She's worried about you, hiding out in the middle of nowhere. We all are. Clara made a mental note to have a serious talk with her former supervisor. I'm not hiding. I'm taking time to heal. From what happened with your mum, I understand. Don't. Clara's voice hardened. Don't you dare bring her into this. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Daniel spoke again, his voice had that cajoling tone he used with difficult patience. Clara, honey, I know you're hurting, but running away to play farmer isn't the answer. The ER needs you. I need you. You needed me so much you were sleeping with Amber from radiology behind my back. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. That's over, Daniel insisted. It was a stupid mistake. You weren't yourself those last few months with your mom so sick, and so it's my fault? Clara stood up, anger coursing through her. Because I was focused on my dying mother instead of massaging your ego? That's not what I meant. I think it's exactly what you meant. Clara took a deep breath. Don't call me again, Daniel. We are done. She hung up before he could respond, then turned off her phone for good measure. Her hands were still shaking, but now from anger rather than shock. Clara sat back down on the porch steps, trying to calm her racing heart. She hadn't expected Daniel's call to affect her so strongly. She thought she was over him, over the betrayal, but hearing his voice had brought it all rushing back. The pain, the humiliation, the sense of having been so completely fooled by someone she trusted. She didn't realize she was crying until she felt the tears on her cheeks. With a frustrated swipe, she brushed them away. She would not cry over Daniel Reyes again. He wasn't worth it. The sound of a truck engine made her look up. Miguel's pickup was pulling up her driveway. Clara quickly dried her face and tried to compose herself as he parked and got out. You left your book, Miguel said, approaching with the paperback in hand. He stopped short when he saw her face. What happened? Clara took the book with a forced smile. Nothing. Just a call from my... Miguel studied her for a moment, then sat down beside her on the porch steps. He didn't speak, just offered his silent presence, a gesture Clara appreciated more than any words of comfort. "We were engaged," she found herself saying. "Daniel. He's a doctor at the hospital where I work. We were together for 6 years. Miguel," nodded, still not speaking. "I found out he was cheating the day after my mum's funeral." Clara's laugh was hollow. "He sent me a text meant for her by mistake. Classic, right?" "He's a fool," Miguel said simply. Clara looked at him in surprise. "What?" "Anyone who would betray someone like you is a fool." The sincerity in his voice made fresh tears spring to Clara's eyes. "You barely know me." "I know enough." They sat, in silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. "My mother had cancer," Clara said eventually. "That's why I took the leave from the hospital. After watching her suffer for months, then dealing with Daniel's betrayal, I just couldn't face going back to work. Couldn't face the pitying looks, the whispers." Miguel nodded in understanding. "So you came here. My great-aunt offered the house, said it would be a good place to heal." Clara looked out over the farm fields, golden in the setting sun. "I didn't expect to find—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish that sentence. Peace, purpose, connection. "I should check on the evening milking," Miguel said after a moment, standing up. "Will you still come for Lucky's feeding later?" Clara nodded. "Of course, I promised." Miguel hesitated, then reached out and briefly squeezed her shoulder, a gesture so unexpected that Clara almost gasped. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm glad you came here." Before she could respond, he was walking back to his truck, leaving Clara to wonder at the warmth his simple touch had ignited within her. That evening, as Clara made her way to Miguel's barn for Lucky's feeding, her mind was still churning with thoughts of Daniel's call and Miguel's unexpected words. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a beauty she would have been too busy to notice in her old life. As she approached the barn, she heard voices, Miguel's deep tone and a higher female one. Slowing her steps, Clara peered. Through the open barn door, Rebecca Phillips stood close to Miguel, one manicured hand resting on his arm. She was dressed as if for a night out, in a form-fitting dress that seemed wildly impractical for a farm visit. "One dinner, Miguel," Rebecca was saying. "That's all I'm asking. We can discuss your loan application, the rezoning, all of it." Miguel stepped back, breaking contact with her hand. "I've already told you, Rebecca. I'm not interested." Rebecca's smile tightened. "This isn't about interest, it's about business. Your business specifically, which is in trouble if you don't get this loan." "I'll find another way," Rebecca laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet barn. "In this economy? With your credit history since Maria's medical bills." She shook her head. "You're not exactly flush with options." Miguel's face hardened. "I appreciate your concern, but I can manage my own affairs." "Like you managed things with Maria?" Rebecca's voice dropped, becoming almost venomous. "We both know how well that turned out." Clara saw Miguel flinch, as if he'd been struck. His voice, when he replied, was dangerously quiet. "You need to leave, now." Rebecca tossed her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Fine. But my offer stands. One dinner, my choice of restaurant, this Saturday. Let me know by tomorrow." She turned toward the door, forcing Clara to quickly step aside to avoid being seen. From her hiding place behind a stack of hay bales, Clara watched Rebecca climb into a sleek luxury car and drive away, leaving a cloud of dust in her wake. Only when the sound of the engine had faded did Clara approach the barn again. Miguel was standing with his back to the door, his hands braced against a wooden post, his head bowed. He looked defeated in a way Clara had never seen before. "Miguel," she called softly, not wanting to startle him. He straightened immediately, his face shifting into a neutral expression. "Clara, I didn't hear you come in." "I just got here," she lied, unwilling to admit she had overheard his conversation with Rebecca. "Is everything okay?" "Fine," he said shortly, then sighed at her skeptical look. Rebecca stopped by. "She's persistent." Clara moved to Lucky's stall, where the calf greeted her with his usual enthusiasm. "I gathered that much at the farmer's market." Miguel watched as she began preparing Lucky's bottle. She's making things difficult with the loan, because you won't date her. Clara couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. That's extortion. Miguel's smile was grim. That's Rebecca. Clara fed Lucky in thoughtful silence, mulling over what she had overheard. Rebecca had mentioned Maria's medical bills. Had Miguel's wife been sick before the accident? Was that what had strained his finances? "Can I ask you something?" she said finally, setting the empty bottle aside. Miguel leaned against the stall door. "You can ask. What happened to your wife?" The question came out more bluntly than Clara had intended, and she immediately wished she could take it back. "I'm sorry. That's none of my business." Miguel was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, just as she was about to apologize again, he spoke. "There was a storm," he said, his voice distant. "Worse than the one the night we met. Maria was 8 months pregnant." Clara's heart clenched. She hadn't known about a baby. She started. "Having contractions," Miguel continued, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance. "Too early. We needed to get to the hospital. The main road was flooded, so we took the old logging road through the hills." He paused, taking a deep breath. The road gave way. A mudslide. The car went over the edge, caught on some trees about. Halfway down the ravine, Clara covered her mouth, horrified. "I managed to get out," Miguel said, his voice now barely above a whisper. "I climbed back up to the road, got a signal on my phone, called for help. They said they could only reach one of them. Maria or the baby, not both." Clara felt tears filling her eyes. "Oh, Miguel." "They asked me to choose." His voice broke on the last word. "My wife or my child? What kind of choice is that?" "An impossible one," Clara whispered, her heart breaking for him. Miguel's eyes finally met hers, filled with a pain so raw it took her breath away. "I chose Maria. I told them to save my wife, but the baby, our son, he died anyway. And then Maria, when she found out..." He shook his head. "She gave up, just gave up. Died 2 days later in the hospital." Clara moved without thinking, stepping out of the stall and wrapping her arms around Miguel. For a moment he stood rigid in her embrace, and then, with a shuddering breath, he returned it, his strong arms pulling her close as if she were a lifeline in a stormy sea. "It wasn't your fault," Clara whispered fiercely against his chest. "You made the only choice you could with the information you had." "Everyone in town knows," Miguel said, his voice muffled against her hair. "They look at me, and they see the man who couldn't save his family." "That's not fair," Clara protested, pulling back to look up at his face. "No one could have made a better choice in that situation. No one." Miguel's eyes searched hers, looking for judgment or pity. Finding neither, something in his expression softened. "Rebecca was Maria's cousin," he said quietly. "She blames me. Says if I had chosen the baby, at least part of Maria would have lived on." "That's cruel," Clara said, anger flaring on his behalf. "And wrong. You did everything you could." Miguel stepped back, breaking their embrace but remaining close. "After it happened, I withdrew from everyone, focused on the farm, let things fall apart financially. Rebecca's family owns the bank, and they've made it clear they haven't forgotten or forgiven." Clara thought of Rebecca's smug expression, her manipulative tactics. "So she's using your financial situation to force you into a relationship. She says she just wants a chance, that she can help me get back on my feet." Miguel's expression hardened. "But I know what she really wants. She wants me to admit I made the wrong choice, that I should have saved the baby." "And the dinner? The loan?" "Means to an end." Miguel sighed heavily. "Without that loan, I might lose the farm. My family has been here for generations. It's all I have left." Clara's mind was racing. There has to be another way. What about online fundraising? Or applying for agricultural grants? Miguel shook his head. "I've tried everything. In this economy, with my credit history." He trailed off, echoing Rebecca's earlier words. An idea struck Clara suddenly. "What about my great-aunt?" Miguel looked at her in confusion. "Elisa, what about her?" "She's not exactly poor," Clara explained. "My mother used to say that Aunt Elisa was the wealthiest woman in the family. She just chose to live simply. Maybe she could help with the loan, or at least co-sign." Hope flickered briefly in Miguel's eyes before doubt extinguished it. Why would she do that for me? Because you're her neighbor. Because she's a kind person. Clara squeezed his arm. Let me at least ask her. What do you have to lose? Miguel covered her hand with his own. You'd do that for me? The simple question, asked with such genuine surprise, made Clara's heart ache. How long had it been since anyone had offered Miguel help without expecting something in return? Of course I would, she said softly. That's what friends do. Friends. The word felt inadequate for what was growing between them, but it was all Clara dared to offer right now. She was still healing, still finding her way back from her own pain. And Miguel. His wounds ran so deep she wondered if they would ever fully heal. Lucky made a noise from his stall, reminding them of his presence. Clara stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of Miguel's hand, still covering hers. I should finish up here, Miguel said, dropping his hand. It's getting late. Clara nodded, feeling the loss of his touch like a physical thing. I'll come by in the morning as usual, as she walked back to her great-aunt's house that night, the stars bright overhead in the clear sky. Clara felt something shifting inside her. The pain of Daniel's betrayal, the grief of her mother's death. They were still there, but somehow less sharp, less all-consuming. In their place was something new, a growing certainty that she had found something genuine here, in this quiet countryside, with a man who carried wounds as deep as her own. Whether it was friendship or something more, Clara wasn't sure yet. But for the first time in months, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow, instead of dreading it. Inside her great-aunt's house, Clara picked up her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. It was time to have a serious conversation with the woman who had offered her this sanctuary in the first place. A conversation that might change everything for Miguel. As the phone rang, Clara glanced out the window toward Miguel's farm, visible in the distance. She didn't know if her great-aunt would agree to help. Didn't know if Miguel would accept that help if offered. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would do whatever she could to ease the burden of the choice that had haunted him for 2 long years, because that's what you did for people you cared about. You stood by them. You fought for them. You helped them find their way back to the light. And somewhere along the way, Clara realized, Miguel had become someone she cared about very much indeed. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows as Clara sat at the table with her great-aunt Elisa. Despite being in her 70s, Elisa Duarte carried herself with the vitality of a much younger woman. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, the same deep brown as Clara's, missed nothing. So, Elisa said, stirring honey into her tea, you want me to help your neighbor with a loan? Clara nodded. Miguel needs it to save his farm and start the organic conversion. The local bank is being difficult. Because of Rebecca Phillips, Elisa stated rather than asked. At Clara's surprised look, the older woman chuckled. My dear, I may live simply, but I know everything that happens in this town. The Phillips family has had it in for Miguel ever since Maria's death. Then you know about what happened? The accident? Elisa's expression softened. Such a tragedy. That poor man had to make an impossible choice, and then lost everything anyway. It wasn't his fault, Clara said, a note of defensiveness creeping into her voice. No one could have chosen differently in that situation. Elisa studied her great niece, over the rim of her teacup. You care for him. It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. I do. He's been through so much, Aunt Elisa, and now Rebecca is using his financial situation to pressure him into a relationship. Shameful, Elisa muttered. Though not surprising. Rebecca always wanted what Maria had, even when they were children. Clara leaned forward eagerly. So you'll help him? Elisa set down her cup. I'll need to see his business plan for this organic conversion and his current financial statements. I may live out here in the country, Clara, but I didn't build my wealth by making uninformed investments. Clara's heart leaped. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. I'll ask him to bring everything over. Not necessary, Elisa said, rising from the table. I'll go to him. It's about time I paid a visit to the Herrera farm anyway. Miguel's father and I were good friends back in the day. An hour later, Clara walked beside her great-aunt up the path to Miguel's house. Elisa had exchanged her house dress for a smart pantsuit that emphasized her still slender figure. She carried a leather portfolio that Clara suspected contained more financial information than most banks would request. Miguel was waiting on the porch, looking nervous but determined. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean button-down shirt instead of his usual work clothes. "Ms. Duarte," he greeted Elisa formally. "Thank you for coming." "Elisa, please," Clara's great-aunt corrected him with a warm smile. "I've known your family too long for such formality, Miguel." They moved into Miguel's dining room, where he had laid out several folders of documents. Clara had never seen him look so uncomfortable, not even during their first awkward meetings. "I'll leave you two to discuss business," she offered, sensing that Miguel might speak more freely without her there. "Nonsense," Elisa said firmly. "This was your idea, Clara. And besides, Miguel might need your moral support." For the next hour, Clara watched in amazement as her seemingly simple great-aunt revealed herself to be a shrewd businesswoman. Elisa asked pointed questions about crop yields, market prices, and projected returns on investment. Miguel answered each query with growing confidence, his passion for the farm evident in every word. "Your organic transition plan is solid," Elisa concluded, closing the folder containing Miguel's business proposal. "But these interest rates the Phillips Bank is offering are highway robbery." Miguel's shoulders slumped. "It's the only offer I've been able to get until now," Elisa said, reaching into her portfolio and extracting a document. "I'm prepared to offer you a loan at 4% interest with a 5-year grace period before repayment begins." Miguel stared at her in disbelief. 4%? The bank was asking 12. "Because they don't want you to succeed," Elisa said bluntly. "I do." She slid the document across the table. "This is a preliminary offer. My lawyer will draw up the formal agreement next week. Take some time to think it over." Miguel glanced at Clara, who gave him an encouraging smile. "I don't need time," he said firmly. "I accept your offer, Ms. Elisa, and I don't know how to thank you." Elisa waved away his gratitude. "Thank Clara. It was her idea." She gathered her papers and stood. "Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to see this famous calf I've been hearing so much about." As they walked to the barn, Clara fell into step beside her great-aunt. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means so much to him." Elisa patted her arm. "I recognize a sound investment when I see one. Both the farm and the farmer." Her knowing gaze made Clara blush. In the barn, Lucky greeted them with his usual enthusiasm, trotting over to the stall door at the sound of Clara's voice. The calf had grown considerably in the weeks since his rescue, his coat glossy and his eyes bright with health. "Well, aren't you a handsome fellow?" Elisa cooed, reaching out to scratch the calf's ears. "Hard to believe he was at death's door not so long ago." "Clara saved him," Miguel said, his voice soft as he watched her interact with the calf. "I might have missed him entirely if not for her." Something in his tone made Clara look up. Miguel was watching her with that same intensity she had glimpsed before, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve, or a rare sight he wanted to commit to memory. Elisa didn't miss the exchange. "Clara has always had a gift for healing," she said casually. "Animals, people, broken things." Before Clara could respond to this pointed observation, the sound of tires on gravel drew their attention. Through the open barn door, they could see Rebecca's sleek car pulling up to the house. Miguel's expression hardened. "I should deal with this. Excuse me." Clara made to follow him, but Elisa placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Let him handle it, dear. He needs to do this himself." They watched from the barn as Rebecca emerged from her car, dressed impeccably as always. She approached Miguel with a confident smile that faltered when he held up a hand to stop her advance. Though they couldn't hear the conversation, the body language was clear. Miguel spoke firmly, gesturing occasionally toward the barn where Elisa stood watching. Rebecca's posture grew increasingly rigid, her hands clenched at her sides. Finally, she turned and stalked back to her car, slamming the door before driving, away in a spray of gravel. When Miguel returned to the barn, there was a new lightness to his step. Rebecca won't be bothering us anymore, he announced. I informed her that I've secured alternative financing and won't be requiring the bank's services. Elisa chuckled. I imagine she didn't take that well. Not particularly. A hint of a smile played around Miguel's lips. Especially when I mentioned who my new investor was. Elisa glanced at her watch. Speaking of which, I should be going. My lawyer will be calling this afternoon to begin drawing up the paperwork. She turned to Clara. Will you be staying for dinner, dear, or coming home? The casual question caught Clara off guard. I haven't thought about it. Stay, Miguel said softly. If you want to. I thought I might grill some steaks to celebrate. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest at the invitation. I'd like that. Elisa nodded approvingly. I'll see myself out. You young people enjoy your evening. With a knowing smile, she departed, leaving Clara and Miguel alone in the barn with Lucky. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the calf's contented munching on some hay. Your aunt is quite a woman, Miguel finally said. Now I know where you get it from. Clara smiled. She surprised me too. I knew she had money, but I had no idea she was such a shrewd businesswoman. The loan she's offering? Miguel shook, his head in wonder. It changes everything, Clara. I can save the farm, start the organic transition, maybe even hire some help. I'm so glad, Clara said sincerely. You deserve this chance, Miguel. He took a step closer to her. I have you to thank for it. Clara shook her head. I just made a suggestion. You did all the work with your business plan. It's more than that. Miguel's voice dropped lower. You believed in me when no one else did. You didn't look at me and see only my mistakes, my failures. The intensity in his dark eyes made Clara's heart race. I see a man who survived unbearable loss, she said softly. Who still gets up every morning and cares for this land, these animals? That's not failure, Miguel, that's incredible strength. Something shifted in Miguel's expression, a softening, a shedding of armor long worn. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, almost reverential. I never thought I'd feel this way again, he murmured. After Maria, I closed that part of myself off, didn't think I deserved to feel anything but guilt and grief. Clara leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. We've both been running from pain, me from the city, you into your solitude. And yet here we are, Miguel said with a hint of wonder, standing in a barn brought together by a lost calf in a storm. Clara smiled. Lucky lives up to his name, it seems. He's brought us both some luck. Miguel's gaze dropped to her lips. Clara, The sound of his phone ringing broke the moment. Miguel sighed and stepped back, pulling the device from his pocket. It's the feed supplier. I need to take this. As he stepped outside to take the call, Clara knelt to stroke Lucky's head, her heart still racing from the almost kiss. Was she ready for this, for the feelings growing between them? She had come here to heal, to escape, not to fall for a man with his own complicated past, and yet there was something so right about being here with Miguel, something that felt like coming home in a way she had never experienced before. Miguel returned a few minutes later, slipping the phone back into his pocket. Sorry about that. Everything okay? He nodded, just confirming an order. He hesitated, then asked, Would you like to see something special before dinner? It's a bit of a walk, but I think you'll like it. Curious, Clara agreed. They left Lucky, contentedly munching hay in his stall, and set off across the fields. Miguel led her past the main pastures, through a small wooded area, and up a gentle slope. As they walked, he pointed out various plants and trees, his knowledge of the land evident in every observation. My father taught me the name of every plant that grows on this property, he explained. Said a farmer needs to know his land like he knows his own face. Clara smiled. He sounds like a wise man. He is. They're enjoying their retirement in Arizona, but I know my dad misses this place every day. Miguel glanced at her. He'd like you. Would he? Miguel nodded. He always said you can tell a person's character by how they treat animals and elderly people. You saved a calf in a storm and charmed my neighbor, who happens to be one of the most discerning elderly ladies I know." Clara laughed. "Aunt Elisa, here's hardly a typical elderly lady. All the more reason her approval means something." They crested the hill and Clara gasped at the view that spread before them. From this vantage point, both their properties were visible, along with the surrounding countryside. The late afternoon sun cast everything in a golden glow, the fields appearing to ripple like a green and gold ocean in the gentle breeze. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed. Miguel stood close beside her. "This is my favorite spot on the whole farm. I come up here when I need to think, or remember why all the hard work is worth it." Clara understood completely. The view was not just beautiful, it was restorative, a reminder of how small individual troubles could seem in the face of such natural splendor. "I used to come up here with Maria," Miguel said quietly. "We'd talk about our future, the family we planned to have. After she died, I couldn't bear to visit for months, but eventually I found my way back." Clara turned to face him. "Thank you for sharing this with me." Miguel looked down at her, his eyes reflecting the golden light. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" she asked, her heart quickening at his serious tone. "When you first came here, I was existing, not living, going through the motions each day, letting guilt consume me." He took a deep breath. "But then you arrived, running into a storm to save a calf, showing such compassion without even thinking about it, and something inside me woke up." Clara felt tears prickling behind her eyes. "Miguel, I know you came here to heal," he continued gently, "to escape your own pain. And I know you might leave once your leave from the hospital is over, but I needed you to know what you've done for me, whether you stay or go." The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within Clara. "I came here thinking I was running away," she admitted. "From the hospital, from Daniel's betrayal, from the emptiness of losing my mum. I thought I'd hide out for a few months, lick my wounds, and then go back to my old life." "And now?" Miguel asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. Clara looked out over the rolling fields, then back to the man beside her. "Now I'm not so sure that's what I want anymore. The hospital called yesterday. They want to know if I'm coming back when my leave ends next month." Miguel's expression remained carefully neutral. "What did you tell them?" "That I needed more time to decide." Clara took a step closer to him. "The truth is, Miguel, I've found something here I never expected. The joys of country living," he teased gently, though his eyes remained serious. Clara shook her head. "Something more important than that. I found a path forward, a way to heal that isn't just about escaping pain, but about building something new." Hope flickered in Miguel's eyes. "And what would that something new include?" Clara gathered her courage. "I hope it would include you." The words hung between them for a breathless moment. Then Miguel closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "Clara Martinez," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I never thought I'd have a second chance at happiness. Never thought I deserved one. But if you're willing to take a chance on a broken farmer with a complicated past..." Clara placed her hand over his heart, feeling its strong, steady beat beneath her palm. "We're all broken in some way, Miguel. Maybe that's why we fit together so well." When his lips finally met hers, it felt like coming home after a long journey. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as they both let go of the fear that had held them back. Around them, the breeze carried the scent of earth and growing things, a promise of renewal. When they finally broke apart, Miguel rested his forehead against hers. "What about your job? Your life in the city?" Clara smiled. "There are hospitals in the county that could use an experienced ER nurse. And as for my life, I think I might be ready to build a new one, here. With me?" The vulnerability in that simple question made Clara's heart ache. "With you," she confirmed. "If that's what you want." Miguel's answer was another kiss, this one filled with promise and possibility. When they parted, he took her hand in his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "We should head back," he said reluctantly. I promised you dinner, and the sun will be setting soon. They walked back toward the farm hand in hand, the comfortable silence between them speaking volumes. As they approached the barn, Clara insisted on checking on Lucky one last time before dinner. The calf greeted them with his usual enthusiasm, butting his head against the stall door for attention. Clara laughed and scratched his ears. He's going to miss you when he joins the herd, Miguel observed, coming to stand beside her. Clara leaned against him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. We can still visit him, and maybe what? Miguel prompted when she hesitated. Maybe by then we could think about bringing another rescue animal to the barn, one that needs a little extra care. Understanding dawned in Miguel's eyes. You want to stay involved with the farm, Clara nodded. If that's okay with you, I've discovered I love it here. The animals, the land. She looked up at him shyly. The farmer. Miguel's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds, radiant, and full of warmth. I think that could be arranged. In fact, with Elisa's loan, I was thinking of expanding the operation, maybe adding a small animal rescue component to the farm, rehabilitating injured wildlife, taking in abandoned farm animals. That's a wonderful idea, Clara said, excitement building in her. I could help with the medical aspects. We'd make a good team, Miguel agreed, his arm slipping around her waist. We already do, Clara replied, leaning into his embrace. As they stood there in the golden evening light, Lucky watching them curiously from his stall, Clara marveled at the unexpected turns life could take. She had come to this quiet countryside broken and hurting, seeking only solitude and escape. Instead, she had found purpose, possibility, and a love she never expected, all because she had run into a storm to save a struggling calf. What are you thinking about? Miguel asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Clara smiled up at him. About the night we met, when you said you'd never seen such beauty in such a simple act. Miguel's eyes softened with the memory. I meant it. That moment, seeing you in the rain, so determined to save a creature most people wouldn't have noticed or cared about, it woke something in me that I thought had died with Maria. Hope, Clara said softly. Hope, he agreed. And the possibility that maybe, just maybe, my heart wasn't as permanently broken as I thought. Clara stood on tiptoe to kiss him gently. Neither was mine. They walked back to the house together as the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Clara's decision about her job, the beginning of Miguel's farm transformation, the gradual healing of wounds that still needed time. But for now, in this perfect moment, it was enough to know they would face whatever came next together. Sometimes Clara reflected as Miguel's hand held hers securely in his own. The most beautiful beginnings came from the most unexpected places. A rainstorm, a stranded calf, and two broken hearts, finding in each other the missing pieces they needed to be whole again. And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky above Miguel's farmhouse, Clara knew with quiet certainty that she had finally found where she belonged. Not in the frantic pace of the city hospital, not in the false security of her relationship with Daniel, but here, in this peaceful countryside, with this quiet, strong man who had shown her that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, care and love, just like a lost calf rescued from a storm. The end.